Canada just made its biggest trade gamble in decades, and it might have backfired spectacularly. Prime Minister Mark Carney dropped most of Canada's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, hoping to restart negotiations with Donald Trump. But here's the kicker. Trump still isn't budging, and Canadians are calling it capitulation. So what really happened behind closed doors, and why Canadian workers are furious about Carney's latest move?
Promised elbows up before the election. He's been elbows down since. He promised a deal by July 21st. He secured no deal. He said he could, quote unquote, handle Donald Trump and negotiate a win. Yet since Mark Carney became Prime Minister, tariffs have doubled on Canadian industries. Regrettably, Mr. Carney's weakness has now encouraged the Chinese government to come after us with higher tariffs on our farmers and fish harvesters.
To understand this dramatic shift, we need to rewind to how this trade war began and why Canada found itself in an impossible position. When Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he wasted no time reshaping global trade. By April, he had declared what he called Liberation Day, imposing sweeping tariffs that sent shockwaves through the global economy. Canada, being America's largest trading partner with $2.5 billion in goods crossing the border daily, was hit hard. Trump slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, 35% on most other goods, and even 50% on copper, sectors where Canada is a major supplier to the U.S. market. Canada's response was swift and decisive. Under then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Ottawa imposed counter tariffs on $60 billion worth of American products. This wasn't just symbolic retaliation, it was strategic economic warfare. Canadian tariffs hit everything from American oranges and alcohol to clothing, motorcycles, and cosmetics. The message was clear: if Trump wanted a trade war, Canada would fight back. But something fundamental changed in Canadian politics that spring. Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor who had promised voters he would take an elbows-up approach to Trump, won a decisive election victory. His campaign slogan became a rallying cry for Canadians frustrated with American economic bullying. Carney promised he was the man who could get the best deal with Trump, someone who wouldn't back down from a fight. For months, this standoff continued. Canada and China were the only two countries that had retaliated meaningfully against Trump's tariff regime. While other nations negotiated separate deals or simply accepted the new reality, Canada held firm. The counter tariffs were working as intended. They were hurting American exporters and putting pressure on Trump to negotiate. What many people don't realize is the depth of economic integration between our two nations. Canada and the United States don't just trade with each other.
For decades, we have integrated supply chains, just-in-time delivery. I've said before, Canada and the United States don't as much as sell things to each other, but build things together and sell them around the world. We've taken very, very tough measures, as has the United States, with respect to dumping from countries like China of steel and aluminum. So we're optimistic that we can continue to have those conversations with President Trump's administration and make the case that there's an economic opportunity for both countries if we reset some of those sectoral tariffs.
They build things together and sell them around the world. From automobiles to aluminum, from softwood lumber to energy products, our supply chains are so intertwined that disrupting them hurts both sides. Canadian pension funds alone have nearly $1 trillion invested in the United States, with the potential to grow by $100 billion annually. This isn't just about trade, it's about a partnership that has taken decades to build. Then came the phone call that changed everything. On August 21st, Carney and Trump spoke directly for the first time in months. What was discussed remains largely private, but the next day, Carney made a stunning announcement that caught even his own supporters off guard. Canada would remove 1% of its retaliatory tariffs, effective September 1st. The justification was carefully crafted but ultimately unconvincing to many Canadians. Carney argued that Canada would mirror Trump's approach by removing tariffs only on goods covered by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as CUSMA. Since Trump had carved out CUSMA-compliant goods from his tariff regime, Canada would do the same. It sounded reasonable on paper, but the reality was more complex. Here, quote, S what actually happened. Canada removed tariffs on a massive range of American products, from poultry and dairy to fruits, vegetables, and spices. The list was extensive: turkey, chicken, eggs, milk, cream, butter, yogurt, various cheeses, ice cream, tomatoes, cucumbers, citrus fruits, melons, berries, and dozens of seasonings and spices. But Canada kept its 25% counter tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles, the very sectors being hammered hardest by American duties. The reaction from the provinces was mixed, but at least one province isn't backing down.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says his province isn't backing down from its ban on American alcohol anytime soon. That despite calls from a U.S. liquor group to put American booze back on Canadian shelves.
If there's a deal, another USMCA deal, which I don't think is going to happen for the next few months, but you never know with President Trump. He could pull the carpet out from underneath us in a heartbeat like he has before. Or they get rid of their tariffs, and then we'll bring the booze back into the LCBO. And if they don't, then they aren't getting any booze on our shelves.
Chris Swanger is the president and CEO of the Distilled Spirits Council.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford made his position crystal clear, stating that Ontario won't lift its ban on American alcohol until U.S. tariffs are removed. They get rid of their tariffs and we'll bring the booze back, Ford declared. If they don't, then they aren't getting booze on our shelves. This hardline stance from Canada's most populous province showed that not everyone was ready to wave the white flag. The political opposition seized on Carney's decision immediately. Pierre Poilievre had a different vision entirely.
All of the day's troubles behind. That your biggest problem will be how you get the kids to eat all of their dinner, finish their homework, and get to bed on time. I confess that we fail on the last one regularly in the Poilievre household, but these are the kinds of problems that we all want to have. Unfortunately, there are bigger problems that people face after 10 years of disastrous Liberal government that has driven costs, crime, immigration, and employment through the roof. People worry. They worry that they can't afford a home in the first place. That if they do have a home, they can't afford to put food on the table because of high Liberal taxes and inflation. They worry about losing their jobs because of Liberal taxes and temporary foreign worker programs that take jobs away from Canadians. They worry that even if they have a job, a home, and food on the table, that they're not safe in their homes.
He proposed that if he were Prime Minister, he would demand a simple exchange. Remove your tariffs, we remove ours. His criticism was particularly stinging because it targeted Carney's signature campaign promise. His elbows have mysteriously gone missing, Poilievre said, turning Carney's own slogan against him. The Conservative leader accused Carney of showing weakness on the international stage, calling it yet another capitulation and climb down. Some economists warn this approach could backfire spectacularly.
Tariffs on the Americans arguably will do more damage to Canadians than they will to the Americans. We rely heavily on trade with the U.S., yes, but imposing tariffs, countervail or retaliatory tariffs, raises the cost on things that Canadians buy. We're not paying that cost now. It's the Americans that are paying that cost because their government has imposed tariffs on things that Americans buy. So were we to do the same thing, we would join the Americans in fighting for the shovel that they're using to dig their own grave or the baseball bat that they're using to hit American consumers. It's hard to take on an emotional level, but We're angry, we're upset, but it's hard to be angry and upset and smart at the same time. So I look on this in that lens as an adjustment to avoid harm to Canadians.
Trade expert Carlo Dade from the University of Calgary pointed out that imposing counter tariffs could actually harm Canadians more than Americans. We're essentially joining the Americans in fighting for the shovel that they're using to dig their own grave, he explained. The retaliatory tariffs would raise costs for Canadian consumers, adding to the economic pain already caused by American duties. But the harshest criticism came from the workers and industries still under fire from American tariffs. Catherine Cobden, president of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, called the move a disappointment, arguing that reciprocal tariffs protect Canada's industries and workers during this trade war. Marty Warren, Nati Onal director of the United Steelworkers Union, was even more direct. The federal government must remain steadfast in working to not only safeguard and protect Canadian workers, but aggressively build Canadian economic resiliency. The frustration was understandable. These workers were still facing the full brunt of American economic warfare while watching their government give up one of its few sources of leverage. Lana Payne, president of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union, captured the sentiment perfectly. Walking back counter tariffs isn't an olive branch, it only enables more U.S. aggression. Carney tried to frame the decision using hockey metaphors that had served him well during the campaign. There's a time in a game when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up, he explained. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, and want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game. The problem with this analogy was that it wasn't clear Canada was actually winning or even controlling the puck. Trump's response to Canada's concession was lukewarm at best. He called the decision nice, but made no reciprocal moves to ease American tariffs on Canadian goods. The White House issued a statement saying the move was long overdue and that they looked forward to continuing discussions, but offered no concrete commitments. This is where Carney's gamble becomes truly risky. By removing most counter tariffs, Canada has essentially unilaterally disarmed in a trade war, while hoping Trump will negotiate in good faith. The bet is that showing flexibility will encourage American compromise. But Trump's track record suggests he's more likely to interpret concessions as weakness and press for even more favorable terms. The strategic calculation behind Carney's move becomes clearer when you understand the broader context. Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc traveled to Washington to meet with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the first such high-level meeting since July. LeBlanc characterized the conversation as constructive, but admitted that the two countries weren't on the verge of having an agreement. This admission is telling. After months of economic warfare and now a major Canadian concession, the best Ottawa can say is that they better understood the work that remains to be done. It suggests that Trump's demands go far beyond what Canada is prepared to accept, even after dropping most of its retaliatory measures. The timing adds another layer of complexity. The CUSMA trade agreement is scheduled for review next year, giving Trump another opportunity to reshape North American trade relationships. Carney has said the government is preparing for those negotiations, but critics argue he's already given away crucial leverage before those talks even begin. There's also the question of domestic political fallout. Small business owners had complained that Canada's retaliatory tariffs were almost as damaging as the U.S. tariffs themselves, according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. But removing them without securing reciprocal American concessions leaves Canadian businesses vulnerable to continued American economic pressure without any corresponding relief for their costs. The economic data reveals the scale of what's at stake. More than 75% of Canada's exports go to the United States, making the relationship absolutely critical for Canadian prosperity. Trump's tariffs, combined with retaliatory measures from other countries, are estimated to reduce U.S. GDP by 1.0% and cost American households an average of $1,300 annually. But for Canada, the stakes are even higher given the concentration of its trade relationship. What makes Carney's position particularly precarious is that he's now caught between competing pressures. Business groups want all tariffs removed to restore normal trade flows. Labor unions and affected industries want Canada to maintain pressure on the U.S. until American tariffs are lifted. And Trump appears content to maintain the status quo, having secured Canadian concessions without offering meaningful reciprocal measures. Looking ahead, several scenarios could play out. Best case for Canada, Trump interprets the tariff removal as a good faith gesture and begins meaningful negotiations to resolve remaining trade disputes. The CUSMA review next year could then proceed smoothly, preserving the framework that has governed North American trade for years. More likely scenario, Trump pockets Canada's concession and maintains pressure on the remaining sectors, steel, aluminum, and autos, while using the CUSMA review to extract additional concessions. This would leave Carney looking naive and cost him significant political capital domestically. Worst case, Trump escalates further, interpreting Canadian flexibility as weakness and imposing additional tariffs or trade restrictions. This would vindicate critics who argued that unilateral disarmament was a strategic error. The broader implications extend beyond Canada-US relations. Other countries are watching closely to see whether making concessions to Trump leads to reciprocal flexibility or simply encourages further demands. If Canada's approach fails, it could discourage other nations from seeking negotiated solutions to trade disputes. There's also the question of what this means for Canadian sovereignty and dignity on the international stage. Critics argue that Carney's approach makes Canada look weak and subordinate to American economic power. Supporters counter that pragmatic flexibility is necessary when dealing with an unpredictable American president who has shown willingness to damage long-standing alliances over trade disputes. The steel and aluminum sectors remain particularly vulnerable. These industries employ thousands of Canadians and are concentrated in politically important regions. If Trump maintains or increases pressure on these sectors while Canada has given up its main source of leverage, the political fallout could be severe. Interestingly, Canada isn't the only country facing this dilemma. The European Union has threatened retaliatory tariffs but has also delayed implementation, hoping for negotiated solutions. China has imposed some retaliatory measures but has also shown flexibility in certain sectors. The pattern suggests that even America's largest trading partners are struggling to find effective responses to Trump's trade policies. What makes Canada's situation unique is the depth of economic integration with the United States. Unlike China or the EU, Canada can't easily diversify its trade relationships or find alternative markets for its exports. This geographic and economic reality limits Canada's options and increases the pressure to find accommodation with Washington. The human cost of this trade war often gets lost in discussions of tariff rates and trade balances. Canadian steelworkers, aluminum producers, and auto workers are facing layoffs and plant closures. American consumers are paying higher prices for goods. The economic integration that has benefited both countries for decades is being unwound, with uncertain consequences for future prosperity. Carney's defenders argue that he's playing a longer game, positioning Canada for the CUSMA review while maintaining relationships that will be crucial regardless of who occupies the White House in future years. They point out that Canada still has the best trade deal with the United States compared to other countries, and that preserving this advantage requires flexibility and pragmatism. Critics respond that this misses the fundamental nature of Trump's approach to international relations. They argue that Trump respects strength and exploits weakness, making Carney's conciliatory approach counterproductive. From this perspective, Canada should have maintained maximum pressure until securing meaningful American concessions. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Trade negotiations are complex, multifaceted processes where timing, leverage, and personal relationships all matter. Carney may be betting that his personal relationship with Trump, combined with demonstrated flexibility, will yield results that a more confrontational approach would not. But the clock is ticking. With the CUSMA review approaching and domestic pressure mounting, Carney needs to show concrete results from his more accommodating approach. If Trump continues to pocket Canadian concessions without offering reciprocal measures, the political sustainability of this strategy will come into question. The broader lesson may be that in an era of economic nationalism and trade wars, traditional diplomatic approaches may be insufficient. When dealing with leaders who view trade as zero-sum competition rather than mutually beneficial exchange, the old playbook may not work. For now, Canada waits to see whether Carney's gamble will pay off. The removal of most retaliatory tariffs represents a significant shift in strategy. From confrontation to accommodation, from pressure to persuasion. Whether this approach succeeds in securing better terms for Canadian workers and businesses remains to be seen. What SC clear is that the stakes couldn't be higher. The Canada-US trade relationship underpins Canadian prosperity and shapes the country's place in the global economy. How this trade dispute resolves will influence Canadian policy for years to come and could reshape the entire North American economic relationship. The next few months will reveal whether Carney's bet on diplomacy over confrontation was strategic brilliance or a costly miscalculation. For Canadian workers still facing American tariffs, and for a country trying to maintain its sovereignty while managing its most important economic relationship, the answer can't come soon enough.